The 11 o'clock light from the hallway cut across the bedroom floor, and I heard her keys hit the bowl by the front door before I heard her footsteps, and I told my wife that the baby I was carrying was mine, not hers, that as far as I was concerned, she was not this child's other parent at all. The words left my mouth before I could stop them, and the silence that followed them was the loudest thing I had ever heard. Let me go back. Let me start from the beginning, because if I just give you that one sentence, you'll think I'm a monster. Maybe I am. I've been lying awake trying to figure that out for 2 days now. My name doesn't matter much, but my wife's name is Vivian, and I think about her name a lot lately because it used to be the warmest word in my mouth, and now it sits there like a stone. We had been together for 6 years and married for 4. We met the way a lot of people meet. In the worst possible circumstances, both of us underpaid and overworked at a job neither of us liked, finding each other in the break room over burnt coffee and a shared hatred of fluorescent lighting. She made me laugh on the worst day of my year, and I think I decided right then, standing by the vending machine, that I was going to marry that woman one day. And I did. We built something I was genuinely, embarrassingly proud of. We weren't rich, but we were comfortable, which in this economy felt like winning a small lottery every single month when the bills got paid, and there was still something left over. We had a little house with a crooked front step that Vivian kept saying she'd fix and never did, and I loved that crooked step because it was ours. Our work schedules lined up. We ate dinner together every night. We were affectionate in a way that made our friends roll their eyes, holding hands under the table, kissing in grocery store aisles, the whole nauseating display. I never once took it for granted. I want you to know that. I knew what we had was rare. About 6 months before everything fell apart, we made the biggest decision of our lives. We decided to have a baby. Because of who we are, 2 women who wanted to build a family together. We sat down with a fertility specialist, and we talked through every option until our head spun. And we landed on something that felt, to us, like the most beautiful compromise possible. We would do IVF, but we'd use Vivian's egg, and I would carry the baby. That way both of us would be woven into this child from the very start. Her blood, my body, her genes, my heartbeat the baby would fall asleep to. I remember holding her hand in that cold office and thinking, this is it, this is the thing that ties us together forever. The transfer worked on the first try, which the doctor told us was lucky, and I cried in the parking lot for 20 minutes while Vivian held me and laughed and cried at the same time. I was going to carry our daughter. We found out it was a girl. We were going to be mothers. I have never in my life been so full of something that felt like hope. And then, almost in the same breath as that joy, Vivian got the promotion. I need to be fair to her here because I've spent 2 days being unfair to her in my own head, and I'm trying to do better. The promotion was a big deal. We worked at the same company, and this was a senior position, the kind people clawed at each other for years to get. When they offered it to her, I was the first person she called, and I screamed so loud in the kitchen that I scared the neighbor's cat off our crooked step. I was proud of her. I'm still proud of her. I want that on the record before I tell you how it nearly destroyed us. The job consumed her. I don't say that to be dramatic. I understand the stress of a new role, the way you have to prove yourself, the late nights that come with trying to earn the respect of people who are watching to see if you'll sink. I got it. So I did what I thought a good partner does. I rearranged my entire life around hers. I made sure she came home to a clean house. I cooked dinner every single night, even when the smell of certain foods made my pregnant stomach turn over. I packed her lunches in little containers with notes tucked under the lid, dumb little notes, "You've got this," and "I love you," and once just a drawing of our daughter as a stick figure with a question mark for a face because we hadn't picked a name yet. Nothing was ever enough. That's the part that started to hollow me out from the inside. About a month into the new position, she started coming home later. First it was an hour past dinner, then 2. Then I'd plate her food and cover it, and put it in the fridge and go to bed alone. And in the morning I'd find the plate exactly where I left it, untouched, the cling film still tight over the top. I started keeping her dinners warm longer. I started eating later so we could eat together, and then I started eating alone at 9. Then 10, telling myself she'd be home soon. I worked my whole schedule around the possibility of her, so that no matter when she walked through that door, there would be a hot meal and a warm wife waiting. But she stopped seeing me. That's the only way I know how to describe it. I would be standing right in front of her, and her eyes would slide past me to her phone, to her laptop, to some point on the wall where her work lived now. It is a strange and terrible thing to become invisible in your own home, to the person who once couldn't take their eyes off you. 6 months. That's how long it went on. 6 months of me getting bigger and sicker and lonelier while she got further and further away. And here's the thing about pregnancy that nobody warns you about. It makes you so tender, so raw, that every small wound feels like a fatal one. I was struggling. My body was doing hard, frightening things. I was nauseous constantly, exhausted in a way that sleep didn't fix, aching in places I didn't know could ache. And the one person who was supposed to be holding my hand through it was a ghost who passed through our house at midnight. What would you have done in this situation? I keep asking myself that, and I genuinely don't know. So let me know in the comments, because I've turned it over 1,000 times and I still can't find the version of me that handles it gracefully. I tried to talk to her. God, I tried. I'd ask about her day and get a one-word answer. Phoenix. Long. Busy. I'd ask if she was okay and she'd say tired and disappear into the bathroom. I texted her paragraphs, long, careful, vulnerable paragraphs where I laid my whole heart out on the screen and press send and watched the little red appear with no reply for hours. When she did reply to those, she'd say she was sorry. She'd say she'd do better. And for a few days she would. She'd come home at a decent hour. She'd ask about the baby. She'd hold me on the couch. And I let myself believe it was over, that I'd gotten my wife back. And then, like a tide going back out, she'd slip right back into the late nights. The closed laptop she opened the second she got home, the silence. She missed the appointments. Every single one after the IVF was done. I sat in waiting rooms alone with my hands folded over my belly, surrounded by couples, listening to my own daughter's heartbeat on the monitor with no one to squeeze my hand and say, "That's her. That's our girl." I'd record it on my phone and play it for Vivian at home, and she'd say, "That's amazing, babe," without looking up, and I'd go into the bathroom and cry where she couldn't hear me. She skipped the gender reveal. We planned a small one. Nothing huge, just a few friends, a cake with pink inside, my best friend filming on her phone. Vivian got called into work that morning and never came. I cut the cake myself in front of our friends and smiled so hard my face hurt and told everyone she was so sorry. Work was just crazy right now. My friend Dana found me crying in the kitchen afterward with frosting on my fingers, and she didn't say anything. She just held me. And that was the moment I understood that I had become a single mother before my child was even born. I started to think I wasn't doing enough. That's the cruel logic of it. Instead of being angry at her, I turned it inward. I thought maybe I let myself go. Maybe I wasn't attractive anymore, swollen and sick and crying all the time. Maybe I was being needy. Maybe a better wife wouldn't need so much. I'd stand in front of the mirror sideways, looking at this body that was making a whole person, and instead of feeling powerful, I just felt unwanted. We hadn't kissed in weeks. We shared a bed, and I would lie on my side of it and feel the cold gulf of mattress between us like a canyon. It is the strangest, most specific kind of grief to miss someone who is lying right next to you, close enough to touch, and somehow 1,000 miles gone. Which brings me to that night, the 11 o'clock night. I'd had a bad day, one of the worst. I've been sick all afternoon, my back was screaming, and the loneliness had built up in me like water behind a dam until I just broke. I went upstairs and I sat on the edge of her bed and I cried. Not pretty crying, the ugly kind, the kind that doubles you over and makes you gasp. I cried because I was pregnant and my hormones were a hurricane. I cried because I was scared of giving birth. But mostly I cried because I was certain, in that moment, that my wife hated me, and I couldn't understand what I'd done to make her stop loving me. I heard her keys in the bowl. I heard her come up the stairs, and she appeared in the doorway and just stood there, staring at me, blank, like she'd walked in on a stranger. And after a long moment, she said, in this flat, exhausted voice, "Why are you crying?" And something in me snapped clean in half. I didn't yell. I want you to know that, because I've replayed it enough times to be sure. I didn't scream or throw anything. I just cried and I let it all pour out of me. I told her how alone I felt. I told her she'd become a stranger. I told her I felt like a shadow in my own house, like I was haunting a life instead of living it. I told her I was carrying our daughter and dying inside, and she didn't seem to care whether I lived or died. I said all of it through tears while she stood frozen in the doorway, not moving, not coming to me, not reaching out, just watching me fall apart like it was happening on a television screen. And when I finally ran out of words, she said the worst possible thing she could have said. She said I was being ungrateful. She said she was working herself to the bone to provide for our family, for our daughter, and here I was complaining. Ungrateful. That word, ungrateful. After 6 months of cold plates and empty waiting rooms and a cut cake she never tasted, something hot and terrible rose up in me. And before I could think, before I could be a better person, I said it. I told her the baby was mine, not hers. I told her that as far as I was concerned, she wasn't this child's parent at all, because she hadn't been there for one single moment of it. Not the appointments, not the reveal, not the heartbeat recordings, not the nights I spent sick and terrified and alone. I told her you don't get to call yourself a parent just because you signed off on the genetics and then vanished. And I need to be honest about what I meant because it matters. I did not mean it because of biology. This is her egg I'm carrying. By blood, this baby is more hers than mine. I have no genetic tie to my own daughter, and I have never once cared, not for a second, because I will be her mother in every way that counts. What I meant, what I was trying to scream at her through that ugly word, was that she hadn't shown up. That parenting is presence, and she had been absent. I meant it as a wound, and I aimed it perfectly, and it landed. If you're enjoying this story, take a second to hit that subscribe button. We post new stories every single day, and I promise you the ending of this one is not where you think it's going. She didn't say anything. That was almost worse than if she'd screamed back. She just looked at me for one more second, and then she turned and walked out of the room without a single word. I heard her go downstairs. I heard the couch creak, and I lay there in the dark with my hands on my belly, feeling our daughter kick, feeling like I'd just taken a sledgehammer to the only thing in my life I'd ever truly built, and I thought, I've done it now. I've finally broken us for good. I didn't sleep. Obviously, I didn't sleep. I lay there cataloging every cruel thing I'd ever said to her in 6 years, which wasn't many. But that night, they all came back like ghosts. I kept thinking about how she'd flinched. No, she hadn't even flinched. She'd just gone blank, and that blankness terrified me more than tears would have. I thought about our daughter growing up in a house split down the middle. I thought about explaining a divorce to a child who wasn't even born yet. I thought, I don't want to leave her, but I cannot imagine raising a baby alongside this hollow workaholic that my warm, funny wife had turned into. She left for work early the next morning. I heard the front door before the sun was even up. No would-be, no note, no coffee made for me the way she used to before everything went wrong. I lay there listening to her car pull away, and I felt the bottom drop out of my stomach. The whole day stretched out in front of me like a desert. And then came the silence. The terrible, ringing silence of a phone that doesn't buzz. I waited all day for a text. For anything. I pick up my phone, see nothing, put it down, pick it up again 30 seconds later out of pure compulsion. I drafted 100 messages and deleted every one. I am sorry. Delete. Can we talk? Delete. I didn't mean it. But I had meant it, hadn't I? At least partly, and she'd know if I lied. I was so afraid that anything I said would make it worse, would be the final shove that sent us over the edge, that I said nothing at all. I just sat in our quiet house, our daughter rolling and kicking inside me, and I felt the fear sit on my chest like a physical weight. I was so tired. That's the thing I kept coming back to. Not angry. I wasn't even angry anymore by the afternoon. I was just bone deep, soul deep tired, and worried, genuinely worried, that my wife was falling down some dark hole of stress and burnout that I couldn't reach into and pull her back out of. I tried to talk to her for 6 months. I checked her phone once. I'm ashamed to admit, a horrible breach of trust in a weak moment, and found nothing. No affair, no secret, just an endless wall of work emails and meeting invites. So I knew it wasn't another person. It was the job. The job had eaten my wife alive and left this exhausted shell wearing her face. By the afternoon, I made a decision. I was done improvising. Every time I tried to talk to her in a moment, I'd either gone too soft and let her off the hook or too sharp and wounded her. So I sat down at the kitchen table with a pen and a piece of paper, and I wrote myself a script. I actually wrote it out word for word, like I was preparing for the most important conversation of my life. Because I wrote down the apology I owed her for the cruelty of what I'd said. I wrote down the truth I needed her to hear about how alone I felt. I wrote down my fear about what would happen after the baby came if nothing changed. And I wrote down the thing I was most scared to say out loud. That I thought she was struggling, really struggling, in a way that was bigger than the two of us. I read it over and over until I almost had it memorized. I didn't want to say the wrong thing. I didn't want to leave anything out. I didn't want to fall apart and forget the words. So I folded that paper up and I put it in my pocket and I waited for her to come home, with my whole future riding on a conversation I'd rehearsed like a part in a play. And then she came home early. That alone nearly undid me. She walked through the door at a normal hour, an hour she hadn't kept in half a year, and the sight of her standing there in the early evening light instead of the dead of night caught me completely off guard. My carefully folded script suddenly felt useless in my pocket. I opened my mouth, and she beat me to it. Before I could get a single rehearsed word out, she said the 4 words every married person dreads. She said, "We need to talk." We went up to our bedroom and sat down on the bed, the same bed where I'd said the unforgivable thing the night before. My heart was hammering so hard I could feel in my throat. I decided I wasn't going to wait for her to swing first. I pulled my courage together and I spoke first, and I used my script, every word of it. I told her I was sorry. I told her that what I'd said about her not being our daughter's parent was cruel and immature, and that I'd said it to hurt her, and that I'd been hurting it out of her instead of talking. I told her the truth underneath the cruelty, that I felt utterly, crushingly alone, that I had felt alone for months, that all I wanted in the entire world was to feel loved by her again. I told her I was terrified that after our daughter was born, nothing would change, and I'd be raising our child as a single mother in a house with 2 people in it. And then I said the hardest part. I told her I was worried about her, that I thought her workload had become something much bigger and darker than just a stressful job, something that was hurting her mind, and that I couldn't watch the woman I loved disappear into it anymore. And then I stopped, and I waited, and she was silent for the longest moment of my life. When she finally spoke, she didn't say what I expected. I braced for anger or defensiveness or that awful blankness from the night before. Instead, her voice cracked, and she told me that she hadn't walked out of the room last night because she was angry. She said yes, the comment stung. It had cut her deep, but that wasn't why she'd left. She left, she said, because it had hit her like a bucket of ice water. A wake-up call. She'd gone downstairs and sat on that couch in the dark and realized, with horror, that I was right, that she had vanished, that she'd let it all slip through her fingers without even noticing. Then she told me everything she'd been holding back for 6 months, and a lot of it I'd had completely wrong. The promotion. She told me she'd never actually wanted it. She had been comfortable, even happy, in her old role, and when they offered her the senior position, her first instinct had been to say no. But it wasn't that simple. Socially, politically, the position mattered enormously. Turning it down could have torpedoed her standing with the higher-ups, damaged relationships she'd spent years building, marked her as someone who wasn't serious. And the company was struggling without anyone in that seat. They needed it filled badly. So when she tried to buy herself time, when she'd said, "I'll need to think about this," they'd just taken it as a yes. They'd announced it. There was no graceful way out. She got swept into a job she'd never really chosen, and she'd been drowning in it ever since, too proud and too scared to admit she was in over her head. And the late nights, the snapping, the silence, there was a reason for that too, one that broke my heart when I heard it. She'd been getting migraines, crushing, blinding migraines at night, the kind that made light and sound feel like knives, the kind that made conversation physically painful. That was why she'd come home and not want to talk. That was why her answers had been so short and so dry. She hadn't been cold to me on purpose. She'd been in pain and suffering in silence, the same way I had, just on the other side of that canyon in our bed. 2 people drowning in the same house, neither one reaching for the other. By now, she was crying, really crying, in a way I hadn't seen from her in years. She said she regretted everything. She apologized over and over. And not the hollow, "I'm sorry, I'll do better," the last 6 months. This was something deeper, something that came from a place that had finally cracked open. And then she told me she'd already done something about it. That very day, the reason she'd come home early was that she had gone in and delegated half of her workload, 50% of it, to other people on her team, something she'd been too afraid to do for months because she thought it would make her look weak. She decided she didn't care anymore. She wanted to be home. She wanted to be home with me and with our daughter, and no job was worth losing us. Drop a comment below. Do you think she made the right call, finally choosing us over the job she was too scared to walk away from? I genuinely want to know what you think because I'm still not sure I'd have had the courage to do what she did. She wasn't done. She told me she wanted to find a therapist, that she knew she needed help managing the stress before it managed her. And then she said the thing that finally explained everything, the thing she'd never told me in 6 years together. She admitted that she was terrified, not of work, of becoming a mother. She'd grown up with parents who were never there, emotionally absent, physically distant, a childhood of cold plates and empty rooms that sounded, when she described it, horribly like the last 6 months she'd put me through. And somewhere deep in her, without ever deciding to, she'd been pulling away from our family because she was scared to death that she would turn into them, that she would fail our daughter the way she'd been failed. So she buried herself in work, in the one thing she felt she could control. And in doing so, she had become the exact absent parent she was so afraid of being. I sat there listening to her, and I felt so many things at once I could barely breathe. Relief that she wasn't gone, that the woman I loved was still in there. Sorrow for the frightened little girl she'd been. And a flicker of something that was almost frustration, because all of this pain, 6 months of it, could have been so much smaller if she had just told me. If she had just said the words out loud. So I told her that. Gently, but I told her. I said I was grateful beyond words that she was opening up to me now, but that I was still hurt, and that what I needed from her going forward wasn't grand gestures or delegated workloads. It was communication. It was her letting me in before things got to the breaking point, instead of suffering in silence on the far side of the bed until I shattered. She nodded, and she cried, and she told me she understood, and that she would try, really try, to let me carry things with her instead of carrying them alone. I'd love to tell you that everything snapped back to perfect in that moment, that the canyon in our bed closed up and we were exactly who we used to be. But that's not the truth, and I promised myself I'd tell you the truth. The honest truth is that I'm not completely sold yet. 6 months is a long time to live without someone who's lying right beside you. I'd gotten so used to being alone, so used to eating dinner by myself, to going to appointments by myself, to falling asleep in an empty marriage, that the idea of having her back almost feels foreign now. Like a coat I wore for years and then put away, and now I have to figure out how to wear it again. There's a part of me that's bracing for it to fall apart, waiting for the tide to go back out the way it always did before. Healing isn't a switch you flip. It's a thing you have to rebuild brick by brick, and we've only just laid the first one. But here's what I do know. For the first time in half a year, my wife saw me. Actually saw me the way she used to across that break room over burnt coffee all those years ago. She heard how I felt, and she didn't get defensive, and she didn't disappear. She broke down and let me in, and she made real changes that same day instead of just promising she would. And after she finished talking, after we'd both cried until we were empty, she leaned across that bed, the bed where I'd nearly torn us apart the night before, and she kissed me. Our first kiss in weeks. And I'd be lying if I said I didn't cry all over again, because I had missed her mouth, I had missed being wanted, I had missed being a person somebody reached for instead of looked past. So that's where we are. Not fixed, not perfect, but facing each other again for the first time in a long time instead of facing away. There's a long road ahead, her therapy, my own healing, the baby coming in a few months into a home we're still trying to rebuild. But we're walking it together now. And that's more than I had 2 days ago when I lay in the dark certain I destroyed everything. I've thought a lot about that cruel thing I said about the baby being mine and not hers. I still regret the way I said it. But I come to understand something about it too. Sometimes the most unforgivable thing we say is just the truest fear we have, fired off like a weapon, because we don't know how else to make someone feel the weight of what's happening. I wasn't trying to take our daughter from her. I was trying to scream, in the only language I had left, "Please come back. Please show up. Please don't make me do this alone." And by some miracle, instead of breaking us, it was the thing that finally woke her up. Here's what I've taken from all of it, and what I'll carry into raising our daughter. You could do everything right. Cook the dinners, pack the lunches, keep the house warm, send the paragraphs, and still lose someone, because love isn't only about the things you do. It's about the things you say out loud when they're hard, the fears you let the other person see before they grow large enough to swallow you both. We almost lost 6 years to a silence neither of us knew how to break. Two people drowning side by side, each too scared and too proud to reach across the dark and say, "I'm not okay, and I need you." If we'd said it sooner, we'd have spared each other months of pain. The lesson I'm keeping is simple, and I learned it the hardest way there is. The silence will never save you. Only the truth, spoken before it's too late, ever will. Guys, the goal here is 1,000 subscribers on this channel, and we're getting closer every single day. If you have not hit subscribe yet, please consider it. It genuinely makes a difference. Thank you for being here.